Now, this is a media conference. This is a global conference. It's only fitting that we would have a quick commercial break in the middle of my presentation, except you're not just going to get to sit back passively and consume. I'm going to ask you to look at the next 2 commercials, and then I'm going to ask you which one you would choose. Here's the ask, right? You are a chewing gum manufacturer, and your goal is to have your product convey the fact that this gum makes your breath instantly fresh, and it stays fresh for up to 10 minutes. All right, that's option 1. Let's look at option 2.
速攻口すっきり10分長続きクロレッツミントタブ。
All right, so most of us probably are not native Japanese speakers, but by show of hands, how many of you preferred option 1? All right, how many of you preferred option 2? All right, really, really interesting. So the story behind this is that McCann, an agency in Japan, was working with Mondelez, and they had the challenge that I stated before. The only difference is that option number 1 was created by artificial intelligence. And the reason that the way that they created that commercial is they studied all the best performing and best award-winning commercials that had happened over the previous 10 years, right? And then they took the input of what the client was trying to solve and basically came up with the concept for that commercial. The second option was a human creative director that had the same sort of input and then used their own creative ideas to come up with something. So what was really, really interesting is they put this out in the public in Japan. And actually, the public chose by a narrow margin the second commercial that they preferred, but then they presented it into a room like this with 200 ad executives, and the ad executives chose kind of how you guys selected it, and that was they chose number 1 as the best option. So my reason for bringing this up is we're talking about intelligence being used in the war for attention, and intelligence is being used in lots of different ways, and I think the assumption that we can assume is AI is not quite there in terms of content production, in terms of taking all of our jobs away. But this is a signal to recognize that AI is getting smarter. It's getting more intelligent. And so the question we have to ask is how can we begin to leverage this intelligence to do better in the work that we're doing? Okay, so we're going to talk about intelligence for about the next 15 minutes or so. I'm going to break it down into 3 primary dimensions. When we think about this war for attention, and capitalizing on the audiences and capturing those audiences and monetizing those audiences, there's 3 primary lenses that we look through. The first one is personalization. Once you gather that attention, obviously you all know we have to make money from the work that we're doing. And then these things and these new mandates are putting pressure on how our organizations are actually wired. And so we're going to talk through some of those things. When we talk about personalization, this used to be a pretty easy game. Looking at our similar framework of this 4 different dimensions to attention, used to be an easy game, right? There was a fixed number of channels and providers and content. The windows of time was pretty simple. Before work, I might look at the weather or the news. After work, I came home and enjoyed my favorite couple of shows. But Today looks a little bit more like this, and in fact, this is a simplified version of the reality that us and all of our audiences experience. When we pick up our phone 150 or 200 times a day, when we interact with all the different devices and all the different channels and networks, it's a pretty complicated environment. And the impact of that is the data that's being received from each of those providers within this attention ecosystem is fragmented. And this might be a clue why you see some of the M&A activity that's happening, right? All the stuff that Comcast is doing, AT&T's acquisition of Time Warner, right? By understanding all of the players and all the dynamics within each component of the attention stack, they might have a better chance of understanding audiences in a more complete way. Now, going back to what I said earlier, from a human-centered design perspective, you have to ask yourself, what do people and what will people ultimately want? I think in the last week, we heard announcements for about 6 new OTT networks. At some point, we will all raise our hand and say, look, I don't want 12, 15, 20 places that I have to go to look for content. I want it to be simple. And I want some technology to know who I am and understand. And so we can imagine something conceptually. This is a conceptual prototype that we designed, which is really just simple. When you walk in the door, and let's say a gentleman walked in and he just sort of had his wife with him and they wanted to watch something during dinner, before dinner, or after dinner, why couldn't you just ask? Why couldn't you just by voice say, hey, can you put something on that interests me? Which is pretty audacious, but it's not that far away. And based on that preference, based on what the system would know about what I've consumed in the past, based on who I was with, based on what time of day it was, based on what I was trying to achieve, you could probably say this would be leaning back content, not leaning forward content. All of a sudden, the system, based on all the access that I had to the content in my library, would surface something for me, and perhaps a short set of recommendations. Now, that's the on-demand response. But what about if we borrow from Spotify, companies that has done a really nice job of this? What if we take a page from their playbook? What if on every Friday, basically based on what the system knew about me, basically provided recommendation and a quick review of, hey, here's all the content that you might be interested in, and not just the content itself, but here's who you might be interested in watching it with. Why couldn't you co-browse? Why couldn't you communicate with people that are not in the same physical location as you and share that experience across time and space? A couple of ideas around personalization. We could spend a whole lot more time, and we're more than happy to after the session, but let's move on to the idea of monetization. Monetization is the name of the game. There's going to be a lot of deals being struck here this week and in the future. But there are these really robust methods now and more complex methods of monetization. How do we monetize the content that we're putting out there in the world? This isn't necessarily a new concept, right? Our friend Walt drew this map about 60-ish years ago, right? He kind of conceived something that Disney has executed for the last several decades, and they've done it really, really well. The difference is now in today's model, if you go back to that flywheel approach, right, where we're able to connect everything and capture data and make sense of it to provide richer and richer experiences, what if you were to take something like Walt's vision, this complex monetization model, and merge it with the capabilities of today? What would that look like? Now, I'm just totally speculating here, but for instance, could you at least ask the question if you're Disney, maybe I can offer Disney as a subscription. Not just the content. Everybody knows that ESPN Plus and Disney Flix or whatever their OTT network will be called. But what about their parks? What about their retail? What about all of that stuff being bundled together for one price on a monthly basis? I'm not saying they should do that. I have no idea if it economically makes sense. But we should maybe perhaps be asking the question because those possibilities now exist. Now, something that is happening today is Amazon, right? Amazon is spending a ton of money on original content. But the way that they're thinking about monetizing it is different than the way that most of us in media have traditionally thought about monetizing it, right? They're not trying to just occupy the consumption of media. They're trying to occupy all your discretionary time and income, right? Whether I'm purchasing goods or whether I'm consuming media, everything that I have from a discretionary perspective, Amazon is saying, we have an answer for you, and we can help deliver what you want better than anybody else. There's this little company called Twitch that Amazon owns. They spent close to $1 billion on it a few years ago. Show of hands, how many are familiar with Twitch? Okay, so many of you still not all that familiar. About a third of the room raised their hands. Last year, I looked at a research report, and I was shocked to see that Twitch viewers on a monthly basis sort of exceeded HBO, Spotify, Netflix, ESPN, all these well-known brands, and I was shocked to see that. Last week, I did a little bit more research, and I found out that over the past year and a half or so, Twitch viewership has skyrocketed and continued to skyrocket, and now is in the realm of some of the most well-known broadcasters and networks in the world. So it makes you go, wow. Twitch has traditionally been really about gaming and people that are watching gamers game, and you sort of scratch your head, but all of a sudden you begin to think about, wow, this is what's capturing the attention of humans today. Those that spend time on Twitch spend on average about 95 minutes a day. Wow. What a fantastic monetization opportunity. But it's not just through traditional monetization models. What they've done is they've now enabled their streamers, and there's a couple million of them, that are live streaming their games to earn money. They basically become their own content channel, so they earn money from advertisers. They also earn money through patronage. So viewers of their content can send them a little tip. They can share a little bit of money with them. And so these guys who are playing games, sharing their tips, sharing their tricks, for a horde, hundreds of millions of gamers around the world, they actually have a new business model. And Activision and the publishers and the distributors are profiting from all of this. And it has some really, unexpected derivatives. For those of you that are not from North America, we have this thing called college football, the American type, American football. And somebody on Twitch said, hey, this is an interesting platform. I'm just going to point my phone at the TV, and I'm going to live stream it, and there's 25,000 people watching a game that wasn't all that important. Twitch, I think, understands the power here, and they've struck a deal with the NFL to now stream Thursday night football games. The NFL's trying to get in the pockets and in the time of every single consumer, and they're experimenting with Twitch, saying, maybe this is a new interesting platform. Monetization hasn't been worked out yet, but I think recognizing where attention is gravitating and coming up with new models is what's happening all around us. If we look at China, China will obviously be celebrated here at this event for good reason. And we look at this thing called Taobao, again, sort of this new model that's on a fringe. There's this idea of a stylist providing entertainment, capturing attention, by sharing what she knows about products and goods that she might be selling herself, that she might be recommending. And again, she has the opportunity to monetize this in a couple of different ways. Number one, she's getting a ton of live feedback. She's providing insight about the clothes and the style that she wears and she likes, how do you wear something, and so on and so forth. She's getting real-time comments. She's cultivating a community. And that community, if they so like, don't necessarily have to buy the goods, but just like on Twitch, they can provide some patronage. They can provide that in the form of stickers and say, hey, wow, we really like what you're providing. We're not going to buy your products, but what you just told me in the last 20 minutes was really valuable. I'm going to tip you $5, so thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And the reason why I'm showing this is obviously she can also make money by selling her products and recommending it. And I don't think they have an advertising model yet, but you can imagine how they might. And so the reason why I bring this up is that our assumptions about what media and content is are being shifted. If you look at the US market, right, shopping and entertainment and social networks, they're pretty disparate. We gear towards an audience that is very specific and try and solve for efficiency. In China, what's happening, shopping is entertainment. It's like this adventure. It's this highly social, rich entertainment, adventurous thing, and they've built that in, and they're stretching the models of what we believe are traditionally disparate in terms of commerce, entertainment, and social networking. So, those are on the fringe. What's happening a little bit closer to our core models? Now, we know that Facebook and Google have done a pretty good job of figuring out how to monetize digital content. They do that through advertising. That model's not going away, but we do believe that there's some opportunity to rethink sort of how that is done. You can imagine streaming a show. This is a popular show in the United States called This Is Us. And you can imagine in the middle of that show, since most of us watch recorded content today, saying, wow, I really like that product. I really like that bowl that's in the center of it. What is it? Tell me more about that. Wow, I'd like to learn more. And perhaps, maybe, why couldn't we embed a commerce opportunity in the content itself? Why couldn't I be able to pause, select that particular product, and either buy it or save it for later before continuing to watch my content? And it's not like this is a pipe dream. This technology exists today. Google Lens now is providing this technology where you can point your phone at anything in the physical world and begin to learn about what it is and perhaps even purchase a product. There's a company called Riff that is really changing the way that we all conceive of product placement. Anybody notice a difference in these two pictures? Right? One of these has a bottle of Dove soap. The other one does not. And what's interesting is product placement deals are normally struck way in advance of the content being produced. What Riff's technology does is it enables you to put products into the content post-production based on the segments, based on the audiences. And so, for instance, the same audience might be made up of folks that are under drinking age, right? They might see, for instance, in a scene, a bottle of liquor. But if they're showing it and we know that the audience is under drinking age, perhaps they'll be shown a bottle of Red Bull in the same scene, in the same content. This totally shifts the way that we might think about monetizing content. So we've talked about personalization with a couple of examples. We've talked about how we might rethink the way that we monetize content in new ways. But obviously that requires that we build in a different level of agility within our organization. So this is a very messy slide, but you can kind of see a lot of the M&A activity that's been represented here. And we know from things like AOL and Time Warner, just because one company buys another doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to reap those synergies. You have to be able to harness the capabilities in a way that moves fast and begins to consider the type of changes that we're talking about today. But partnerships, data partnerships, brand partnerships, those are all required in this new world. And the way that we think about agility is sort of broken into three different tiers. Number one, you've got this operational agility. That's what we work on to strip out costs, make things go faster. Increasingly, our work specifically is around this idea of cross-functional agility. How do we get different departments in different geographies to work more closely to each other? But then there's this idea of ecosystem agility. How do we actually build a shared set of data, understanding, decision-making capabilities across a broader network? And so you can imagine, right, using some of the themes that we've talked about earlier, creating this network of folks, these insiders who would actually get a chance to preview content, to preview ideas, to begin to instrument our real-time feedback loop so that we can make better decisions. You can imagine getting deeper understanding about your geographic demographic, brand preferences, time and preferences and context to device. Stuff that you all do today, or many of the studios and networks do today, but doing this in an automated fashion so we're not spending weeks or months gathering and capturing this data, but this is directly informing what we're doing in terms of our content. You could imagine having one body of content, and because you have a better understanding of your audiences, being able to take that body of content and split it into dozens or hundreds of different derivatives and be able to distribute it on the right distribution channel in the right time, in the right way with a different monetization model. All of this, and kind of on the heels of what we saw with the commercials, artificial intelligence can help us do our jobs better and faster. Obviously, there's a ton of pressure on us from a speed perspective. So already, AI is being used to help generate multiple versions of scripts, right? A human still makes the final call, but why wouldn't we use AI to do a ton of research for us, surface up many different derivatives, and then let the human do the things that humans are best at, creative? Why wouldn't we use that in production? Why wouldn't we use that in the post-production or from an editing process? And then finally, you guys are really, really well equipped to work in this world of AI because you're creators, you're creatives, right? And that is the core differentiator that us humans have, is to put a level of human creativity and collaboration on top of it. And as we move forward, more collaboration is going to need to happen within your organization to make decisions better, faster, based on a shared set of data, but also perhaps across organizations as you begin to come up with different brand partnerships. And you can imagine having one set of technology and a destination where you're collaborating with those that are in your ecosystem that don't work for your company, but as you develop these partnerships and more pressure is being put on moving faster and quicker, you begin to make those decisions. So that was a very, very quick 30 minutes. I appreciate your time. We talked about leveraging intelligence for the purposes of personalization, monetization, and agility. Obviously, there's a whole lot more to talk about. We'd love to hear your questions and also know that from our perspective, we've done a ton of work already in the universe of media, not solving only future problems, but all the stuff that you guys are dealing with today. We'd love to have ongoing conversations with you. Once again, thank you for your time. We will also be hosting a breakfast tomorrow in, is it this room, Ronnie? Palais 5? Please join us there. We've got an office on the 4th floor, rooms 45 and 46. If anything that you heard here was very, very interesting, we'd love to spend more time. Once again, it's been a pleasure to be with you. Hopefully you have a fantastic Mipcom. Thanks again for your time.